Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to our bird watercolor class. I've been doing this pretty much every week for over 3 years. I did take a break over the summer, but um, it's just a nice continuous class that's been going strong, and I'm so happy to paint birds with you and share my expertise on painting in watercolor. So it's great that you're all here today, and it's been fascinating painting all these different owls this month. I've been doing quite a few, and today we're doing the barn owl, and I just love the barn owl. I actually saw a barn owl last weekend when I was out at Salvie Island, and I saw it hunting and across a field and catching a mouse. So it was really neat to see owls. I rarely see owls. That was probably the third time I've ever seen an owl in the wild. So it's so exciting when that happens, and I feel like it's just a really special moment. So um, but I do love painting the barn owl. I've done some beautiful paintings of barn owls. I've done it several times. This was one. It's a card. It's in plastic. We did this one a while back. Lee, I think you were in that class maybe. And
Yes, yours
yeah,
is more beautiful though.
that was probably one of my best bird paintings I ever did. So I love this bird. And today's lesson is going to be about reserving the white of the paper. So we're going to talk about the white of the paper and how to create different neutral light gray colors. And we're using a very minimal palette today. I only have one, two, three, four colors, and then maybe black. So cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and Naples yellow. Those are the three colors we're going to use primarily in the bird. And then we'll use a little bit of Payne's gray. And then I also have a little bit of black watercolor, which the eye is so nice and dark and deep in this. And I love this picture, and I picked it specifically because getting the details and the faces of the owls and getting that beak to be subtle with the feathers, it's very hard, it's challenging. So doing these kind of close-up details of the face, I think, is going to be really beneficial to you today, and you can bring that on into your next classes when we do more owls. So I'm going to switch over to my web camera so you can see what I'm doing. And I would like if you all could mute yourselves during the class, and just to eliminate any background noise. And then of course you can unmute yourself at any time. So thank you. Thanks for being here today. It's such a wonderful time of year to paint owls. So I'm excited. So, okay, this is the picture we're going to be working on today. So you all should have that printed out. And I've done my drawing here, and I'm working on a square format today. It's a 12 by 12 arches, cold press, 140-pound paper. This is a block, and the blocks are nice because they're sealed on the edge. So when you're painting on a block, I've seen some people tear their paper off the block and then paint. You don't need to. You can paint right on your block. And I did tape, oops, it's not very clear now, is it? Let me get in focus here. Okay, there it's focused. So I did put some tape around so that I can have a border when I finish my painting, and I like to have that white border. And I just I actually have been tracing my birds with this carbon graphite transfer paper, which is nice. The line isn't so dark and I can erase it, but if you're not familiar with the tracing technique, you can buy this graphite transfer paper on Amazon, and one side has graphite and the other doesn't. It's usually the darker side. And then you place that down on your watercolor paper and then your photograph on top of that. And then with a very sharp pencil, just trace, the lines where you want them to be, just the general shapes. And then you have a perfect drawing of a bird. And I just find it to be a really good tool to draw with. Not everyone is a good drawer, so I think it's really, really helpful. Now, so today I want to talk about the white of the paper. So this was a sketch I did last night, and it was good to do because I can see, the whitest white you're going to get is the white of the paper. And I can see, and this whole right side of the face, there's a lot of white. So you really want to try to reserve that white of the paper. So we're going to start by painting the eyes, because the eyes we're going to have to go back to a couple of times to get that nice dark color. And then we're going to work from there and get into these grays, and then really just keeping it really loose and blending those colors wet on wet so that they flow really nice, and really trying to get that light reflecting on the owl's face. Also getting that reflection in the eye. We're gonna talk about that too. And looking at the light side and the dark side, there's always a light source, no matter what it is that you're painting, a bird or a still life or a landscape. There's a light source, and really getting that sense of light is important in your painting. Okay, so I have a few brushes that I've been using. Yeah. I think all you really need are some nice round brushes, and then maybe a bigger brush. Sometimes I choose my brushes according to the size of the feathers and the size of paper. So depending on what size you're working on, that's gonna determine the size of your brushes. But I'm basically gonna be using some round brushes, definitely a small brush, a 0 or a 1 or a 2 for the eyes. And then I have a 6. Oh, those are 8s. I have a 6 and an 8.
Hey, Rhonda,
Round.
when you have a chance, I had a question.
Yes.
I don't seem to have black. I didn't see that on the list, but I have
Okay. It's
tint.
okay. Do
I
you
have I have
paper?
Daniel Smith neutral tint, which
Oh,
looks black.
yeah, that's fine.
Would that work?
That will totally work. You
Okay.
can get that dark enough so that it looks black.
I see.
So yeah, thanks for asking. Neutral tint or Payne's gray or even Van Dyke brown, and that's another one I probably will dip into. Van Dyke brown is a really, really dark brown.
I've
It,
got both those. Which do you think would be best?
well, let's use both because I want to get that subtle contrast of the darks right next to each other in that eye. So we'll use a little bit of Van Dyke brown. Now that's Van Dyke brown. To make, if you don't have Van Dyke brown, you can make a really dark brown with any of your browns, like raw umber, and mix it with French ultramarine blue, and you'll get the same nice dark as a Van Dyke brown. So raw umber and French ultramarine, it's almost the same as Van Dyke brown, almost the same, close enough. See, they look almost the same there. So, I have my palette here that I just have been using forever, and I want you to be able to see that. And I'll just spray it down before I start, just to get my paints wet. And if you're gonna keep taking classes, I do recommend having your palette all set up and ready. And if you have any questions about setting up your palette or colors or anything, I have a few YouTube videos on how to set up a palette, but you can always just email me and ask me questions. So let's see, I didn't clean this from last night, but it's okay because I'm going to probably be using these same colors. But I'd like to start with the eye. And if you just look really closely, so sometimes I have my iPad, I do have my iPad next to me where I can really zoom in and look closely at the eye. So there's my iPad. You can see when I zoom in, I can really see that eye. And I can see the different color variations in that eye. So we're gonna do a little bit of dark brown in there, and then some black or Payne's gray or neutral tint, and just get that subtle difference. So it's kind of cool with the iPad to be able to see all those really small details. Now in my drawing, I left a part of the eye here for that reflection, and then that white little glimmer. So, make sure you have that drawn out well. And even in the other eye, in the picture, there's a very, very subtle reflection in that eye. So maybe draw that out so that you can see that reflection. And we're going to leave the white of the paper to begin with. So, sorry, there's more than 4 colors. There's cobalt blue, burnt sienna, Naples yellow, Payne's gray, and Van Dyke brown. And then maybe later we'll need some white gouache or a white pen to get those little spots if we get to that stage. So let's just start with a very small brush and some Van Dyke brown. And when I'm mixing color, there's different levels of saturation in my little puddles here. It's also nice to have a little scratch paper by your side so that you can see what your colors look like. So we want that eye to be pretty dark. And to get that really dark, sometimes I have to go back in another time. But let's just start with that inside of the eye. With some Van Dyke brown. And then when I do these little reflections, I just outline it. And just get that nice little outline. You know, you can always go back and darken things, but it's really hard to go back and get anything lighter. So it's good to kind of be hesitant sometimes to reserve those whites of the paper. And we'll do both of those pupils of the eye. Now, these owls have such big eyes. They have really keen eyesight. So their eyes are take up a very large percentage of their head. They're actually quite large on the inside too. So I think it's knowing that about owls. I really like to do, you know, really detailed eyes. So the inside of the eyes is going to be Van Dyke brown. Now, when that dries a little bit, we'll put either black or Payne's gray around. There's like a round ring around the eye, and you'll be able to see a very subtle contrast between those two dark colors. So let's let that dry. And then we're gonna move on to some burnt sienna, and I'm gonna start with my 6 brush. But actually before that, I want you to see, like, you can get some really beautiful grays. So with just cobalt blue mixed with burnt sienna. Now they're pretty much complementary colors. And just those two colors, you can get a very beautiful neutral gray. Now that gray is what we're going to basically be using throughout. Now, if you even mix a little bit of Naples yellow into it, it becomes a little bit of a creamier gray. So those are the 3 colors we're going to use on this to get those shadows in the white. Now, since the right side of the head is lighter than the left, we're going to start painting on the darkest part of that owl's face, which would be the left side and around that eye. So there is a little bit of that nice warm burnt sienna. So I'm just gonna put that in. Now we're gonna be painting pretty loosely here, and these colors are gonna be really flowing together. So let's just get in a little bit of pure burnt sienna on the corner part of that eye. And wherever you see that burnt sienna, you can get that color in nice and bright and pure. And even in the other eye. I always find it tricky around the beak area with these owls. Sometimes, you know, we want to get that beak so it's not just sitting on top. You want it to be kind of coming out. So we're going to really work on that. Now you could even take a little bit of your burnt sienna and even start to bring it into that kind of ring around the head. And around the bottom, there's a little bit of a circle around the bottom of its head. That's one thing I noticed with the barn owl. The first thing when I saw that owl in a field, it had a round white face, and I immediately knew it was a barn owl. So it's a very distinguished white feathered owl that really stands out. So from there, we're gonna, start mixing up some gray. And you can have a puddle here. You can have a various grays within your puddle. So I just I'm gonna have a cooler gray. Now this is just a little bit of raw sienna, cobalt blue, and Naples yellow. So in this puddle, I have 3 different grays. Now to get that really light shadow of the white, I'm going to go more with the cool gray and really dilute it. Until it's very light. And we're going to start mixing that with the burnt sienna that we just painted on there. So I really want these colors to kind of blend wet next to wet on the paper here. And I'm kind of going into my cooler gray and letting that meet up with that burnt sienna that was already on the paper. And you can see they really start to mix with each other on the paper and have a beautiful soft edge. The barn owl is definitely one of my favorite birds to work, really loose and wet on wet. Now don't get your gray too dark. You don't want it to be too dark. And if it is getting too dark, just wet your brush and draw that paint over so it's not so dark. Now, there's this middle line down the face. So let's just keep those grays to the left of that line. And I'm going to paint around the beak. Now there is a little bit of a shadow under that beak, so I'm going to just strengthen my gray a little bit there. And then draw it out with some water. And then that far left side of the head is going to be even just a little bit darker. So I really want you to kind of be using the water to move your paint around. This is what I have so far. It's a beautiful start. And even without putting any paint on my brush, I'm just gonna keep kind of drawing that color up. Now notice that the top of the head has a lot more warmth in it than the side. So in your gray mix here, you'll have a little bit more burnt sienna in your mix. So I'm not really paying attention to any of those details, the texturing on the feathers. We can always do that later. I'm just looking at the larger shapes. And the shadows. Now, on the right side, there's definitely some shadowing there that isn't the white of the paper. So you can see, this whole right side of the eye has a shadow, and down by the beak there's a shadow. So we're going to try to incorporate a very subtle gray and create a shadow there and still try to keep some of the white of the paper. Now, people ask me sometimes if I use Frisket or some kind of masking fluid, and I really don't. I never really use that stuff. I mean, it's fine. I feel like if it's planned and I know that it's white of the paper, I can save that and be able to paint without using that masking fluid. Now here you might want to really dilute some of your gray. And just like you are mixing it into another color, just kind of blend it in with the white of the paper and soften those edges. So you're really kind of manipulating that paint to move with the water without adding any more paint to it. And be sure to get that little bit of darker gray on that, on those rings around the face, and that's gonna help create some contrast. Even though it's a light gray next to that white, there is a subtle bit of contrast. Now, if you do start to lose some of your whites, you can wipe away some of the paint with a clean, damp brush, and you can remove the paint if it's still wet. Now, as your paint starts to dry, it dries much lighter. And I'm seeing that, I'm losing a little bit of that darker shadow on that other eye. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of my gray just to get that shadow on that left eye just a little bit darker. And by creating a darker dark, that white appears lighter. So if something gets to be, if something isn't as light as you want it to be, make something else darker that will distract the eye from that area. And it's just such a perfect gray, that cobalt blue and burnt sienna. Maybe even want it just even a little bit darker. And then, underneath that ring on the face, I'm gonna just add a little extra blue to get that bit more of a darker, cooler shadow.
So more blue to the gray, right?
Little bit more blue to the gray.
Thank you.
Blue to the gray. And that's quite wet. Just let that dry a little bit. That whole right side is very white, so I'm going to leave that pretty light. And I'm gonna move on and get the color of the beak. So the beak is definitely a little more Naples yellow. Maybe a touch of burnt sienna. It's just almost like a grayed Naples yellow. A little bit of a reddish tint to it. Now here again on the beak, I'm gonna paint the left side of the beak and just leave the right side white. And I keep kind of going back into that shadow by the beak, darkening that. It just wasn't quite dark enough. So while that's drying, I like to, if something's wet, I like to move to a different section. So my head is quite wet, but the eyes that I painted earlier have dried. So I can go back in and get that reflection in the eye with just a little bit of cobalt blue. Maybe I'll just kind of gray my cobalt blue a little bit with some gray. And I'm going to paint around that little white glare.
So is that cobalt blue and what?
It's cobalt blue, and I just mixed it in with my gray so it's not too bright.
Thank you.
And, if you look closely at that reflection, it's like there's a bit of a darker side. So the upper side is a little bit darker. So you can kind of vary that color in that reflection. I'll just show you mine. Then the other side. And it's fine to start, light. So later when it dries and you see that that reflection is not dark enough, you can always go back and darken it. And I know that some of the color around the eye is still just a little bit wet. I'm gonna see what happens if I go in with my, hold on. Sorry, I had an important phone call from my daughter.
When did you use the Naples yellow?
I used, well, there's a little bit of Naples yellow in my gray mix here, and I also used, I used it in the beak
Oh, okay.
mixed with a little bit of burnt sienna. So now I have my Payne's gray. And I'm going back into that ring around the eye. Or your neutral tint, that's totally fine. You can get that nice and dark. See that when you put that Payne's gray next to that Van Dyke brown, there's just they're both really dark colors, but there is a very slight bit of contrast there. You probably don't even need black if you can get it dark enough. Such big, beautiful eyes on this bird. Now be careful if the color around the eye is still a little wet. Mine's a little wet, so it's gonna bleed maybe just a tiny bit, but you don't want it to bleed out too much. Big dark eyes. I'll show you mine. close.
Hmm.
Now, once you have those dark eyes in, you can kind of judge how much darker you need to get around those eyes. Maybe even get a little darker there around. So once those eyes are in, you can see like, okay, maybe you need to get a little bit darker under that beak and then you can kind of work on your beak a little bit. Get that all painted in there. So I'm just kind of strengthening that burnt sienna around the eye, getting that just a little bit more intense. And if you need a little bit more darker shadow, you can use some of your Payne's gray, maybe a little bit underneath the beak. And maybe even need to go back in around that that ring shape around the top of the head with a little extra burnt sienna. Could even put just a touch of Payne's gray in there. And those marks, I'm just being, very light-handed and just kind of drawing it in there. Definitely get some of that Payne's gray and that bottom ring. So I've got the burnt sienna and then just touches of Payne's gray. And that's going to balance out nicely with those eyes. And then as it starts to dry, you may see that you need some more, a little bit darker shadows, especially around that right side of the eye. Getting those shadows around the eye also help let those eyes really sit back. I'm so glad you're all here today. This is my favorite owl to paint because you can get so loose and watery with it. Now my beak was getting lost there. Yeah. How's everyone doing? Good? Okay,
Good. Yes.
nice. So on the body of the owl, I'm gonna get pretty loose with my brush strokes. Use a bigger brush, like my 12 round or even my 16 round. I love these round brushes. So we're basically going to be using the same colors as we go down into the body. So right now my face is just very wet and I'm just gonna have to let that dry until I can get more definition in that beak, and so I'll just let that dry for now. So with a bigger brush, I just need a little bit of a bigger pool of paint here, because I really want to, have my brush loaded up with paint as I get down into these larger feathers. So we're gonna get a little bit richer in our color from, right off the bat. Bigger. Now with the feathers, I really like getting that feather texture with my brush, just that whole shape of the feather. And even, you can even leave a little white space in between. Get some nice blues and oranges in there. Then have that kind of fade into a gray. really, I'm always amazed, you know, how many variations of color you can get with a limited palette. So basically, these are just the three primary colors, blue, red, and yellow. So just with those three colors, you can get so much variation. And you can also use a little bit of Naples yellow in there too. I might fill in my white with the Naples yellow. Now my wing is very wet right now. It's very loose and very wet. So I'm gonna let that dry and I'm gonna come back up to the head here and just gonna work on getting those darks around the eye just a little bit more. Now with our background, we're just gonna do a very simple background, just a light grayish blue, nothing too much, because there's a lot going on in this bird, in the face and And also I love it when you're working wet on wet and it starts to dry and the colors start to mingle with each other and you get this beautiful granulations and color separation. It's really beautiful. Need to go into my beak again and might even change. I'm gonna add a little bit more of a pink color to the beak. Just to add a little bit of a rosier color to my Naples yellow. Just so that it stands out a little more. You can really kind of go in and blend things with a damp brush. If you see some hard edged lines, you can just kind of soften those up with the brush. Just trying to get that shadow a little bit more around the eye. So it feels like it's really deep in the socket. Now, as the wing starts to dry a little, you could get a few darker strokes in there to get some of that shadow. can get, so when you have a light area, you can bring the dark up against it to get some of those shapes of the feathers. When it's dry, you can get some of those. Just add a little dark next to it and feather it up, and it looks feathery. Now I'm gonna go and do my background. And I'm gonna wet the background. With a nice big wash brush. And I'm just gonna take all this color on my palette, mix it up. And you don't have to do this. If you want to keep that, that's absolutely fine. And I'm gonna mix this up to a gray and add a little extra cobalt blue to it. Do a nice blue gray background. Now you just kind of want to make sure that the bird is dry so it doesn't bleed too much. And if your paper is really wet, you can tip it around and move that paint so that it's nice and evenly distributed around the background. So you have a nice even wash. Or maybe it's a little darker at the top. You can kind of let that drip down to the top. Now, for those little marks on there, I'm gonna just show you on my other one that's dry. This is much too wet to start doing those little marks, but one thing you could do would be just taking a small brush and with some Payne's Gray, kind of going in there and getting those little spots. And then after they're dry, you could go in with some a white pen or some white gouache. I have some gouaches. I have this little jar of Pro White. There's another brand that people use. I can't remember what it's called, but it's in a jar like this, and it's very white. But this is also good. This Daler Rowney Pro White. With just a tiny little brush, you can add those little white spots. So when you do the black spots, do the black spots first, and then you can add the bits of white that are in there that are really a special marking to the barn owl. So first do the little black spots, and look at the picture to see where they are. Get the right brush. That brush wasn't so great. A brush with a really nice pointy tip to it. They're very tiny in some spots. So here mine is just way too wet. So I'm gonna wait to do those on the wing. I keep going back to that beak trying to get it dark behind that beak without it being too much. Oh, see, that's good. See, I just put that little bit of dark behind the beak there, and it really made that beak kind of stand out. And there's my barn owl. For now, I'm gonna work on it a little bit more later on, but
Beautiful.
I really love the refined face next to this really loose wing. So I may even go back into my wing a little more after it's dry and work on that a bit more, but I like the balance between the looseness and the refinement of the face. And I may even go back into my eye a little and get it just a little bit darker. It's black. Black here. Yes. So if you have black, it does help get that ring around the eye even darker and deeper. Or just use it, your Payne's gray or your neutral tint a little more saturated and get it nice and dark. And if that reflection is just a little bit too light, go and just get it a little bit more shadowed. Okay, so we have a few minutes to look at everyone's paintings. I'm not going to have that much time. But if you all want to, maybe you could all hold up your paintings at the same time. And we can look at them all like a gallery.
Yeah, good.
Oh, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Fun. That's good.
Very nice. Oh, very cool, Brittany. I love your feathers.
I
Nicely.
cheated. A lot easier on digital, I imagine. Sort of.
Oh, that's not watercolor?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
No, it's my iPad. I'm on Procreate. I wanted to try because I've never used the watercolor brushes. So I was like, oh, I'll try this class.
That's really neat.
Mm,
Nice. Oh, Michelle, beautiful. Hold it up a little higher. I want to take a picture. Here, everybody hold up your painting. Mom? Yes.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm gonna take a picture. Ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Nice. Gorgeous paintings, everyone.
So you got
Thank
all
you.
the time? Neat. Let's see.
What a great class. I hope that you all enjoyed that painting the barn owl. And if you want any more specific feedback, you can always email me a photograph of your painting. One of these days I'm going to set up a gallery on my website for everyone to post their paintings. But I do have a Facebook page, Bird Watercolor on Facebook, which I'm not really active. I stopped doing Facebook, and then I lost being the host of that group, so I'm not in control of that group anymore. But there's hundreds of people in that group, the Bird Watercolor group on Facebook, which is kind of cool. So thank you all so much for being
Thank you,
here.
Rona.
Thank you,
Next-
Anna. See you next time.
This
Thank you, Rhonda. That was
Friday,
fun.
Friday the 13th, I have a Barred Owl class with the Portland Audubon, and that's on Zoom Friday night, Friday the 13th, and that's from 6 to 7:30. But you have to register for those Audubon classes directly on the Audubon website. And then we've got 3 more Tuesday classes. We've got the short-eared owl, the burrowing owl, and then again the barred owl. So lots of owls.
I have a whole
Thank
hour.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
so
you.
much. Everybody
Right.
have a great
Fun.
It was
evening.
fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, Rhonda.
Bye.